Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. This is your morning minute meditation for this morning. Let's take our Bibles and go back to 1 Peter chapter 4. And 1 Peter chapter 4, we have been dealing with the believer learning how to live in light of the last days. And so far, verses 1 and 2, we looked at the believers to live very victoriously. Number 2, verses 3 and 4, the believers to live very spiritually. And thirdly, verses 4 and 5, verse 5 and 6, the believer is to live very consciously. When you come to verse 7 will be our verse this morning. Got one verse. And when you read verse number 7, we come to our fourth point. And Peter is dealing with the child of God in verse 7, living very seriously. So let's look at verse number 7 this morning. But the end of all things is at hand. Be ye therefore sober and watch unto prayer. What Peter is telling the child of God, if you're planning on getting serious about serving the Lord, now's the time to do it. Our time, the end is drawing nigh. Our time's running out. Our days are numbered. Child of God, if you're going to get serious about serving the Lord, it's high time that you and I do that now, get serious now. We find, preacher, there's two things in this text. How can the believer know they're seriously serving the Lord? Number one, you look at their mind. He said, be ye therefore sober. In other words, there's a command that we have a sober mind. That means to be a steady mind, a sound mind. It means to think clear-headedly. It means to be have a balanced head. One writer said it means to have one head screwed on straight. And so we begin to find that in today's Christianity, not a lot of folks have a balanced mind. They're not thinking clearly. They're not sober-minded. The word sober means to have temperance, which means they are to exercise self-control and self-denial. That's discipline. We need discipline in our life. Secondly, not only look at our mind, look at our mood. He said, and watch unto prayer. We live in a day where people are moody. I mean, you just talk to your neighbor, anybody you come in contact with on a daily basis, they're moody. And the reason they're moody is because their mind's not right. They're not thinking clearly. They're not level-headed. They don't have their head screwed on right. People are an emotional mess. And God's children are not to be so frustrated with the cares of this life. We are to be watchful for the Lord's return. We're to keep on, we're to keep watching and to keep waiting for the Lord's return. The word watch means to be sober, means to be calm, means to be cool and collective in spirit. Your mind, if your mind's right in verse 1, then your spirit will be right in verse number 7. And so if we're watching and waiting for His return, that means we're going to be ready for His return. It's time for the believer to live very seriously. He said prayer. The word prayer means to talk and commune with God. We need to be in our prayer closet. It's hard for me to think that Peter deals with watching and praying in this text, that his mind doesn't drift back to the Garden of Gethsemane when the Lord told him to watch and pray 1 hour. And on 3 separate occasions, the Lord come back and found Peter asleep. And so if you're going to get serious about serving the Lord, it's time for us to wake up and get about the Father's business.